أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لقد صدق الله رسوله الرؤيا بالحق لتدخلن المسجد الحرام إن شاء الله آمنين محلقين رؤوسكم ومقصرين لا تخافون فعلم ما لم تعلموا فجعل من دون ذلك فتحا قريبا هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله وكفى بالله شهيدا محمد رسول الله والذين معه أشداء على الكفار رحماء بينهم تراهم ركعا سجدا يبتغون فضلا من الله ورضوانا سيماهم في وجوههم من أثر السجود ذلك مثلهم في التوراة ومثلهم في الإنجيل كزرع أخرج شطأه فآزره فاستغلظ فاستوى على سوقه يعجب الزراع ليغيظ بهم الكفار وعد الله الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات منهم مغفرة وأجرا عظيما صدق الله العظيم.
Subhanallah. Thank you, Hafsa, for that. From our recitation today from Tarawih, wasn't it?
It's actually from mine originally, but
I stole a ruku from him today because I too less.
Oh my God. Is that allowed in Ramdhan?
I don't know, but I'm going to have to get him back for that one.
Okay, inshallah.
You take it tomorrow.
You know, me and Hafiz Umayya used to do that, you know. So every year we'll be fighting over what we want to read. So some years he takes over mine and then I take over his. And this one was
emergency. I thought I'll give it him. Go on.
Oh, that's cute anyway.
Very kind of you.
Weren't you one day heard yesterday?
Yeah. So today's Tarawih was unique because we pronounced the name of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam twice. Yeah, and I absolutely love the 26th juz.
As we were reading today, I was counting the number of references to the Prophet sallallahu and this juz is mamlu, is saturated in reference to the Nabi sallallahu.
I mean, Surah Hujurat is the Allah Ta'ala dictating the adab of the presence of Rasulullah.
I mean, just look at the names of the surahs, all in reference to the Prophet sallallahu. You've got the opening, the Fath. You've got Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You've got the Hujurat, his blessed chambers as well. Like it's just all about, and then wa'alamu anna fiikum rasulullah. The Prophet is amongst you.
وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ لِيُعَذِّبَهُ وَأَنْتَ فِيهِمْ. Put that along with anna fiikum rasulullah. And then you think, look, as an ummah, how blessed we are that Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam is amongst us even now.
Subhanallah.
And then you look the way the ulama described that the reason why adhabat still do not come is because anta fihim. That anta fihim is till the day of judgment. And then by extension, even on the day of judgment, why would Allah Rabbul Alameen punish the ummah wa anta fihim when He's amongst us?
And not only that, if you look in this juz, reference to the companions every single time. وَالَّذِينَ مَعَهُ أَشِدَّاءُ عَلَى الْكُفَّارِ. Surah Hujurat is dedicated to the companions, addressing the companions. Surah Fath, the Fath was with who? Alongside the companions.
لَقَدْ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ.
That's it. يَدُ اللَّهِ فَوْقَ أَيْدِيهِمْ. So Allah's hands above theirs in acceptance.
I mean, if you put two ayahs together, yeah? يَدُ اللَّهِ فَوْقَ أَيْدِيهِمْ. And on the other side, Surah Mulk, تبارك الذي بيده الملك.
Allah.
Look where the ikhtiyar and the power of Rasulullah exceeds to. Yeah, that example which we have from Sahih Bukhari where Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam during Salah lifts his hand 3 times in ruku and then brings it back. The companion asks, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, why did you raise your hands in salah? And he said, I could see a bunch of grapes that were hanging over the wall of paradise. So I stretched my hand and I leaped forward and I was going to break that branch and bring it back on earth. And then I pulled my hand back. Did it 3 times. So the companions asked, Ya Rasulullah, why did you not get it for us? And Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, had I brought it down, my entire ummah would have ate from those grapes till the day of judgment, and it would never end. But I preferred these blessings for you in the hereafter, not in this dunya. So it's talking about the blessed hand of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how far it extends. So, are you going to ask me that question?
I am going to ask you that question.
What is that question?
Everyone knows what the question is.
What is the question?
What's the topic of the day?
What's the topic of the day? Have we got one or?
Somebody was mentioning rizq,
Halal Rizk.
food. So we've just mentioned the hadith about the grapes. Yeah? So it's starting with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Grape being from one of the fruits of paradise. I remember reading somewhere, Allah Rabbul Alameen has put all nutrition within grapes. And books of fiqh mention that if a person wanted to survive on just fruit, then the fruit that he can survive on is grapes. Because they're so filling. Compared to other fruits, grapes are filling, aren't they?
I would have thought it'd be kajur.
Yeah, same.
Dates.
I've got something better than that. Zamzam.
Zamzam.
Ta'am wa ta'am is the food of food.
Fruit.
You have that as well?
It's better than food, isn't it?
We'll combine the Zamzam with dates then, inshallah. That'll be the best.
The aswadain, as the hadith describes.
I've seen today your brother is having rafsa with Zamzam in Medina.
Yeah, that was unique. I didn't see that before.
I never seen that one.
Subhanallah. You have the foods that are mentioned in the Quran. You've got wateen, then you've got wazaytoon. These are mentioned in the Quran.
Rumman.
You've got. When Maryam alayhi salam, she's going through labor, and she has baby Isa alayhi salam, and Quran describes to her. What are the words? How you remind me?
وَهُزِّي إِلَيْكِ بِجِذْعِ النَّخْلَةِ
تُسَاقِطْ
عَلَيْكِ
عَلَيْكِ
رُطَبًا
رُطَبًا
جَنِيًّا.
Yeah, so she's told to shake the trunk of that dead palm tree, and fresh dates fall. And ulama describe, for pregnant women going through labor, if there was anything healthier to have, Allah would have given that to Maryam alayhi salam. So post-labor, pre-labor, one thing that women should actively have
Dates.
as part of their nutrition is dates.
Jamil?
Yes. And then there's so many other elements of this discussion alone. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we know the companions, they survived just on dates. And one thing we were mentioning last night, today at iftar with my father at the masjid was, we have dates so much in abundance in the month of Ramadan. And it's because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has described the blessing, even if it's tasahharu, have sahari, even if it's a single date. Because that's how much barakah there is, that's how much nutrition there is in date itself. Now you have date milkshakes. Have you tried that?
Absolutely. Love them. Especially at iftar.
At iftar. So, if you want to make the president happy, those that are watching, that's why you need to grab him.
The president's always happy, mashallah.
We did have dates today. We had dates with cucumbers.
With cucumbers, yeah?
With cucumber in
Another
there.
sunnah, yeah?
Yeah.
That's right.
So that was...
So hard.
It was a
treat of
first
the
for
day
me.
today.
I've never tried that before until today.
Yeah. It wasn't too bad.
Yeah.
And also in Palestine, I've not seen this anywhere else, but in Palestine they have a date juice. So they've actually mashed up the dates.
Like a prune juice.
Yeah, but it's with dates.
We have it in the
it's actually
Bengali
really
culture. How do you explain this, Shabayo? Gur. It's like a date jam.
It's
crystallized.
Yeah.
Crushed dates.
I know
It's
what
like
you
a
mean.
jam made out of dates, yeah.
A lot you can
I've
do
had
with
that in porridge.
Yeah, that's a good place
That's
for
right.
it.
Yeah.
Dates. It's a jam in it. You can call it a jam.
So is it nabeed where you soak the dates in water?
Yeah.
You drink the water like that.
So in Urdu you call it murabba.
Murabba.
Yeah.
MashaAllah. We all need to be murabba.
Yeah.
MashaAllah.
So it could be of different fruits.
But you need a
yeah.
murabbi first.
We need a murabbi.
The murabbi will take you towards murabba.
So I think there was a question about halal rizq. The way it was to elaborate maybe its importance what role it plays in our lives, maybe dangers of today. Halal Rizk, what do you say?
Mr. President.
Well, there's the hadith, isn't it, about whatever you eat stays in your body for 40 days.
Okay.
So every action that you take, that means if it stays in your body for 40 days, every action is based on what you've eaten.
Affected by it.
Absolutely, it'll have an impact. So halal and tayyib, rizq would have a positive impact. And if you eat something which is not permissible, then it will affect the quality and of your ibadat and your actions. So I've always heard from my elders as I was growing up that obviously all of your life is a test. Everything you do is a test. And if you ever stray, providing you've had rizq halal, the kashish is the word we use in Urdu, the pull of rizq halal is so strong that it will pull you back to the straight path. And that is something I've heard all through my life from our elders. And as I have grown up, you start to see that physically in people. Now, so one of the questions that always pops up is that what about those people who don't know the difference between halal and haram, and they eat haram all the time, yet they're able to do good deeds?
Right.
Why is that? Why is that? Why is it that a mu'min who should know that he or she should eat rizq halal, but then if, God forbid, does not follow the path, why is it that his or her actions would be impacted, whereas somebody who's a non-Muslim and does not eat halal rizq, their actions may not be impacted in the same way? So I'll leave that question for you guys to answer first.
I've got a question. Is there any correlation between your attention in prayer, khushu, khudu, and earning halal or eating halal? Meaning, if a person's not eating halal or earning haram, will that always show? Meaning, can we measure it by our prayer? Because I've heard stories of people who, in their prayer, they haven't got the attention, and then they've always pondered upon it and realized, well, it's because I'm earning haram. Is there a correlation with that?
So the way I see it, I think obviously you do your ibadat for prayer, for dua, and dua is your kalam with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your kalam with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is dependent on the purity of your niyyah, your intention, your khushu and khuzu, your tawajjuh towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And obviously Allah guides whomever Allah wills and however Allah wills, and guidance is written for different people at different times in their lives. Just because you have strayed from the path, the straight path, that doesn't mean that one shouldn't do their dua to Allah, do the kalam to Allah, ask Allah for forgiveness and ask Allah to put them back on the right path. A lot of the things, when I analyze things, I think everything as humans is habitual by nature. As humans, we are
creatures of habit.
Whatever it is, certain people, for example, will want to have tea or coffee in the morning. Until they've had tea or coffee, the day doesn't begin. Certain people will want to have it as the last thing at night. Others can't sleep if they have tea at night. It's all habitual, and it's all in your mind. Similarly, some people, as I was going through university, I saw a lot of students who would not really be very careful about what they ate. Yet they knew the difference between what they should and shouldn't eat. Very much, right? So the question is, why did they choose to go astray, or why did they choose to eat what they knew they shouldn't eat? And for a lot of them, it was more of either because it was convenient, and I'm talking about obviously now 25 years ago.
The dynamics are different.
Now the dynamics are completely different. You've alhamdulillah got halal food at every corner. But it was convenience was one of the elements of choice. The second thing was that they didn't want to stand out from the crowd. as being, as seen different.
Right.
And then you develop a habit of that. You try and conform. Now, when you're trying to conform, that is also habitual. To what extent do you conform? All of these things are part and parcel of habits that you form as you go through life and choices you make. So I would say, yes, it does have an impact, but nevertheless, if you go back to the question that you were saying, it does have an impact, but nevertheless, that is not, in my view, I would say, is a hindrance from you doing kalam to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the doors for forgiveness are open, the door for guidance are always open. It all comes down to, in the end, the intentions, the niyyah, the purity of that intention with which you, because as humans we are open to mistake and we will make mistake in everything we do. The question is, and again, one of the things I think as humans we forget to do is we forget to self-analyze. So one of the, I think one of the primary functions of sitting in seclusion, like even in itikaf, is to self-assess. It's your self-assessment for the whole year. You look at what you've done over the last 12 months. You look at how can you better the next 12 months. You look at your credit and debit balance of your deeds, and that is an opportunity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you in seclusion with one-on-one with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is something I think as humans we don't do. It's so a shaykh explained to me that that process as fikr. I asked a question to my shaykh, my Pir Murshid, Babaji Maulana Manzoor Shah Sahib from Pakistan. What is the most highest form of zikr? And his response to me was that sometimes fikr is better than zikr. So my next question was then, what is fikr? And fikr in Urdu, obviously when you translate it, is pondering over something. And he said, well, fikr is where you sit. You pray your namaz and you sit alone in the presence of Allah, and you think of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like you are in Allah's court and you are doing kalam with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you remember everything you have done wrong. And
there's that saying of Sayyidina Umar, isn't it? He once commanded us and he said, Hasibu anfusakum qabla an tuhasabu. That take account of yourself before your account's taken for you, i.e.
Surah Hashr, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullah wal tanzur nafsum ma qaddamat lighad. Look what you prepared for the hereafter. What have you sent forth? Yeah.
So he said, you think about all the wrongdoings, everything that you can remember that you have done wrong, and you ask Allah for forgiveness, and tears will flow from your eyes if you are sincere in your effort. And that process, when you start doing it day after day after day, as humans, what we tend to do is everything that doesn't sit well in our mind, we push it to the back of the mind. So we compartmentalize it. So we only bring in information which suits us and our nafs feels, better. So when you do this day after day, day after day, Allah gives you the ability to remember things you've pushed in the back of your mind, and they come forward, and you ask Allah for forgiveness of everything that you have done. And slowly, slowly you get to a point with the tears in your eyes, it washes away, cleanses your heart and makes your heart softer. And Babaji used to say that fikr is better than zikr, because it will cleanse your heart, it will cleanse you, and it will make you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there comes a point then when you go through that process that even your good deeds, you feel ashamed about them, because you start to think, did I do it with the right intention? Did I do it to please someone else because somebody else was looking? So all of these things, again, they have a huge impact on who you are and what you become. Again, it comes down to the intention with which you do the act.
I mean, you're talking of realization then, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, this is why you should always ask for tawfiq from Allah, that He gives you that realization, and the sooner it comes, you'll notice the sooner you can start to develop your relationship with your Lord. And what Babaji was mentioning was basically, he summarized a hadith in two simple words, fikr. Hadith says a moment of fikr or of muhasabah, a realization is better than 70 years of worship. Because 70 years of ghafla, imagine where that takes you. But the one moment of realization where you have that awakening, yeah, and you snap out of that routine, that life of, where you were lost away from your Lord. That's what you really are looking for, isn't it? I mean, yesterday we had questions like, how do I increase my sincerity in salah, my khushu, and my relationship with my Lord? And my personal experience, and with the interactions of the community, and you have youngsters come forward and they ask you questions, a lot of them is just a realization. They just wake up one day, and maybe it's a dua of a parent or a buzurg or somewhere in the background that has just had its impact. He's woke up in the morning and that's it. And from that day onwards, he's not missed another salah.
Tawfiq from Allah.
Tawfiq is from Allah. وَمَا تَوْفِيقِ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ.
And that realization, that regret, that is the tawbah, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
The regret is the tawbah.
And for
it's
young
a sign of acceptance, isn't it?
Yes.
Absolutely.
I would like to link this to what Hafiz Hussein was actually teaching me in the morning, the foundation of Surah Fatiha. And like you said before, although you might not be in the best of qualities to pray because of what you've ate, but then again, you got to turn back to your Lord. Alhamdulillah, all praise to be Allah. It's mentioned a noun, not lillah alhamd, like you said. All praise to be Allah, regardless of if you are praising Allah or not, if anyone else is or not. Praise still belongs to Allah. And even further on the conversation, I think it links perfectly to Surah Fatiha, the dua we make, Sirat al-Ladhina an'amta alayhim.
Would you say to those people who might be struggling in the sense that perhaps they have haram income? A lot of people, they feel like, because I'm not the best Muslim right now, because I can't earn halal right now, that I'm not going to be so religious. Do you think that's acceptable, or
no, that's not.
Is that even worse?
I'll share something. I'll share two practical examples, with you.
Okay.
So, two individuals who I was helping with their legal cases. So one of them is now past his retirement age.
Okay.
So I was helping him with something, and I prepared some documentation for him, and asked him to read it, approve it, and then sign it. And once it's signed, to bring it back to me. So I had it posted to his home. And he rang me 4 days after that, and he said, I've got your document, but I don't actually understand it properly. And he wanted to make an appointment so he could come and have it read to him. And I said, ask one of your kids at home to read it, to you. And then if you're still struggling, by all means, then come. And he said, which kids? And this individual has 6 children alive, all in the UK. All in the same city, where he lives. And I couldn't understand, as in which kids, because you've got 6, any one of them will do, right? And they're all educated. And he said to me, they don't listen to me. Whatever I say to them, they don't listen to me. And so I gave him an appointment to come, and he came to my office. I sat with him, and I went through all of the documents, and I after everything was done, I asked him, I said, do they not live in close proximity to you? And he said, no, they do, but they do whatever they please. They never do anything I ask. And he said, I put them through private education. And he said, all my life I worked very hard. And he said, back in the day when the businesses were booming, I gave them everything. But today, I don't see them. And again, my Sheikh, Babaji always used to say that if something is wrong in your life, consider where your rizq is coming from, because that will have a huge impact. If your du'as are not being accepted, one of the considerations should be, is my rizq halal? And, besakhta, without thinking, it just came out of my mouth, and I said, have you thought about your rizq? And perhaps it was a conversation you shouldn't really have with a client, but it just came out because in those days, Babaji were here, and I used to see them every single day in those days. And he sat in front of me and he said, I'm retired, I don't earn. And then after a few moments, I think the question sank in. And then he told me that all through his life he had run a restaurant which was a licensed restaurant.
Allah.
And he provided everything to his kids above and beyond what their counterparts had. But the rizq came from a licensed premises.
License meaning selling alcohol.
Alcohol, yeah. And I think the realization hit him at that point. And he broke into tears and he said, nobody has, all my life, nobody has questioned this. Nobody has ever brought this to my attention. It's actually just hit me that could be a reason why I am in the state I am in.
I mean, such a case is mentioned in the hadith, isn't it? About the individual who is calling upon Allah. His clothes is haram. His food's haram. He's engrossed in haram.
Yeah, وملبسه حرام ومطعمه حرام ومشربه حرام وغذي بحرام فقال يا ربي يا ربي يا ربي.
And the second example I'll give you is another client, a practical example again, who has a chain of off licenses.
Okay.
And the first time I met him actually came to me because he had a problem with his license through the council and he wanted me to represent him against the council.
Okay.
And I refused to take his instructions. I said, I will not deal with it. He will have to go and find someone else. It's not my area of expertise and it's not something I feel comfortable dealing with. Anyway, I've got to know him over the years. I've dealt with some other unrelated matters for him. Just before the last Ashura started, he rang me and he said, are you going into I'tikaf this year? And I said, yes. And he said, can I request you to make a dua? And I said, yes. He said, can you do dua that Allah allows me to sell these businesses and get rid of them? And Allah gives me rizq halal. And I asked him, why has that change in life has happened? And I think, again, as you said, it's a process of realization. At some point, the guidance comes at certain points in your life, and sometimes you have to go through a test before that realization comes, and sometimes it just comes because, as Hafsa was saying, a dua of a buzurg or a parent, and it has that effect. But, alhamdulillah, he said that to me, and I was smiling ear to ear. Alhamdulillah, inshallah. May Allah accept that niyyah from him, and may Allah allow him to move on to rizq halal.
I want to direct one more thing to you. A lot of people who work in the professional environments, various occupations, perhaps something like yours, sometimes they're requested, or their seniors in their workplace request them to do something that is potentially halal, haram income for them. Do you think there's always a way to say no in this day and age? Do you think sometimes
it's very hard?
What would you say to those people?
Look,
let's say you did deal with business contracts and what have you as a lawyer or whatever it is, and someone's come to you and they do sell alcohol, and do you think it's always okay to say no, or is it always a way to say no?
You could take the approach that, look, I'm only providing a service, because that's what the excuse would be, isn't it? I'm only providing a service. Whether it's halal for him, it's between him and his Lord, whether that income or that source of is halal or not. I'm only giving a service for that documentation or legal support or whatever.
You see, if you're dealing with contracts, what you're dealing with is the ability for somebody to do something, whether it's to purchase something. Are you not
facilitating then at the end of the day?
Well, hold on, but let me come to this.
Okay.
So I'll break it down. So the first, all you're doing is you are providing the ability for someone to either do something or not to do something. So if they're, for example, if it's a transaction, right? It's in a commercial world, it's a transaction. Is it always easy to say no? Never. It's never easy to say no. Practically speaking, it's not a situation where you say, it's a pie in the sky when you die. You're actually dealing with it then and there, and it's your livelihood. It's never easy. However, one of the things that over the years I've realized is that it is very important to have a healthy relationship with your colleagues, your employers. If you have a healthy relationship, you can talk about things quite openly. and they understand where you come from, the likelihood is you're not going to be forced into anything. And I'll give you an example. I mean, in this country, when you go to court for hearings, if you want to adjourn a hearing, it is very difficult. You actually have to show good cause to adjourn a hearing. And you'll have to give an application to the judge for the judge to hear it, or at least to read it. And you have to give it by way of a witness statement where you are affirming that everything you're saying in that application is the truth and nothing but the truth. But sometimes what tends to happen is if you have religious occasions, and I'll give you an example. I had a hearing a couple of years back now, which fell on Eid, and it was a matter of then when you have a morning hearing which starts at 10 o'clock, you have to be at court at 9 o'clock. To get to court at 9 o'clock, which means I'll be leaving home at probably 6:45 or 7 o'clock in the morning, which means I may not get to read Eid Salah. So it's very, very difficult. And it was a all-day hearing. It wasn't something which was going to be done in an hour and then you can go and catch a late Salah. I wrote to the court a few weeks ahead and requested the judge for an adjournment on the basis that it was Eid. So I didn't blag it. I said it how it was, specified the reasons behind it, and it is akin to the celebration of Christmas for Christians. And I was absolutely gobsmacked that I got a phone call from the judge himself to say I'm going to adjourn the hearing. So there is. Nice. There is a possibility of sometimes some things happening, but it is, again, I think, having that relationship and that dialogue. It's very, very hard in commercial world to step back, but sometimes you have to.
There are some people who will say, well, at the end of the day, I need to provide, and that's my duty. And so, based on that, they might say, well, it doesn't matter where it comes from, or I can't say no, what have you. And then there are others who would say, no, always prioritize the religion, Allah will give it back to you.
I think the way to consider, so the way I always envisage this, again, this is an example that Qibla Babaji gave me when I started my practice. And the first nasiha he gave me was, he said, you should always aim for, rizq halal. And he said it is like Allah has made certain animals halal for humans to consume. You've got chicken, lamb, beef. The meat of a pig is haram. Don't eat it. Now, when you compare the pig with chicken, lamb, or beef, and compare the number of people who eat chicken, lamb, and beef as opposed to pork, the numbers are far, far greater all over the world. People who will eat chicken, who will eat lamb, who will eat beef, as compared to pork. The numbers are far, far less. Yet the numbers of pigs in the world, even though less people are eating it, are still very, very small compared to chicken, lamb, and beef. So there is greater, barakat and barakah in those animals that Allah has declared as halal. You will never hear that the numbers of chicken or lamb or beef are dwindling. So the options, if you aim for rizq halal, are always there. To say that I can't earn rizq halal and I have to do something just for the sake of providing, it's a very, very, I think, a defeatist way or thinking to have. If you consider this as an alternative, you think, okay, you know what, I'm going to try and aim for rizq halal. I'm going to try and achieve that rizq halal. And that the example of the gentleman I gave you before, who has chains of licenses. He's made an intention in his head that he will, whatever happens, he wants to get rid of them. He wants to sell them. He doesn't know what he will do instead, but he wants to get rid of that. But he has, alhamdulillah, Allah's given him that faith in him now, that he has enough belief in him that once I get rid of it, Allah will open up a door for me through which I will earn, rizq halal. And I think that intention, that belief, if you have that, if that is instilled in you, and you really, really do believe it, Allah will open up a door for you.
And many times it has to be instilled by the parents from a very young age.
Saji, what about the question of liability? How far does liability go? Like, go back to that situation. That lawyer in the situation could say, well, as you said before, that's his risk. I'm here just for the contract. How far legally, Islamically, does liability go? And ethically as well?
So do you mean...
How far and that can extend to, like, all of you work in institutions. For example, the masjid here that you're volunteering at, money comes in. So how much should a mosque be concerned about the liability? That is this money coming in, is it halal or haram? Or once it's in, it doesn't matter, let's use it. Do you get what I'm trying to ask?
I think you're alluding to that question we had off camera.
Yeah.
Taqwa versus Fatwa.
Fatwa. Taqwa. That's exactly what I'm trying
That's
to
where
get
it's
to.
going.
That's where it's going.
That's where it's going.
Fatwa versus Taqwa.
Isn't it?
Taqwa versus Fatwa. I mean, some would say the Fatwa is the Taqwa. What the Deen gives as an answer is what Allah wants, whether it's easy or hard in that situation.
So I've got a question. If you've got a client and the client's got a bargain booze, for example,
Right.
One of many, and he's contracted you to do some professional work for him, either produce documents or support his business in other ways. So, for example, risk assessments. Does that income that you gain from him, does that follow on into if you went to then take that income to the mosque and pay your
That's a good way of
zakat?
point. That's what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah,
Liability.
so
How much
Does that
concern
follow
should we
through?
have
So
towards-
the question is coming from Haram again. So the original
so
question of
do you want
food.
the fatwa or do you want the taqwa?
Well, if you look at the food example,
Okay.
without going into HMC, and looking at the fact that do you take that extra step to ask the restaurant owner to provide evidence of where the meat suppliers come from, and then that further step of investigating the meat supplier to see where the meat originated from, and then sit down to enjoy your meal.
So it's a matter of fatwa and taqwa again. I mean, the fatwa would say that if he's giving you the confidence that this is halal, even by him having displayed a certification and stuff, HMC or any other one, for a believer, it's sufficient to accept that. But it depends on your level of iman. Now, if you are from the Ahlullah, from the Arifun, they wouldn't accept that, just the display of that certification. They would go beyond that and ask, where is that coming from? If you're from the awliya Allah, they wouldn't go before that, beyond that. You have examples of Imam Abu Hanifa, the great Imams, they will go right to the source. So, okay, if that's the animal I'm about to have, where has that animal been grazing? Okay, they'll go to that farm. It will be grazing here. Okay, how has that farm been watered? Which water was used? Now they go to find the source of the water. Do you see how far this is going? I mean, for the common man, for the masses, it's not practical for every single one to go to that length. But if your iman is demanding of you, and you're not at ease until you go to that level, then you have to go to that level.
So how do you measure that then? In practical terms, with the audience and the viewers now, how does one measure that?
And is there actual benefit to that? Meaning, will we find the more concern we show for what we're consuming or earning and how halal it is, if you can use that term, how
So,
halal it is?
for example, my father, we've had
Will
these
we benefit?
discussions, so with the halal certification and stuff. So he's made the effort to go around to the mazbahs, what do you call that in English?
Abattoirs.
The slaughterhouses, that's the word, yes. To see the procedures and stuff for his own satisfaction. And he was content that the certification we're buying for my house, I can speak for, that source of the animals are correct. And if somebody wants to go to that precautionary level, then at least you should make that effort to see how it's being done.
Do you find then, let's say you've eaten somewhere else and you've eaten at home, there's a literal tasteful difference and blessings as well, spiritually as well? So I'm talking both pragmatically and spiritually.
My tarbiyah is slightly different because of the background I come from. So I'm very conscious of what I'm having and where it's coming from. I personally do feel like, the following day, I can relate to the food I've had. As in, the spiritual high that you feel in the mornings, if it's there, and at time it's paranoia or anything, but there'll be just instances where it just click. I had that last night, and I could try and make that relationship. Maybe that's the cause for me feeling down or not feeling the spiritual high that I would normally.
This relates to the fikr you're talking about.
I was just going to say, there's some. I think the way I relate to or I consider is, I think you as humans, again, if you look at it from a objective perspective, you look towards your sixth sense for guidance.
Yeah.
And your sixth sense will guide you depending on what your intentions are and what your niyyah is and how dedicated you are to achieving it. And if sometimes you'll go somewhere and you just, irrespective of how beautiful that place is, you just don't feel at home, you don't feel comfortable.
When it comes to mind, there's hadith, Imam Nawawi brings in the 40 hadith, al-ithmu ma haka fi sadrik.
Allah.
The ithm, however you want to translate that, sin or whatever that is, you don't sit right in your heart. So ethics, you're talking about ethics and what we feel there, does play a role in our spirituality, innit?
Absolutely. And I think, again, it depends. I think the more, sometimes I think it's like, the way I think about it, I think your sixth sense is like a muscle. The more you rely on it, the more you exercise it, the more you trust in it, the stronger it will get. It's like anything, I think. It's any azkar or zikr that you do, the perpetuity, the regularity, the habits that you form in doing it, the stronger that relationship becomes with the tasbih or with your salah or anything else that you do in
By
life.
Hamad, there's a word that I came across. It's firosa. Firosa, is that?
Firosa.
Firosa.
That's the sixth sense right there.
That's the sixth sense, yeah?
The
Is that the
firasa.
sixth sense?
Oh, firasa.
Firasa.
Okay.
Sorry.
Firasa. Ittaqu firasat al-mu'min. Yeah?
So I think that is how I always consider it. Even from, I think, a very young age, from being a university, I would walk into a takeaway. If I didn't feel comfortable, I'd walk straight out, even if it was owned by whoever it was. I'll give you another example. I was at university, and I was with some friends. We were coming back, and in those days we didn't have a car. We walked for miles and miles and miles, and we were all really hungry. So we saw this, takeaway, and it was owned by I think it was a Kurdish man who was.
Sounds
there.
like the beginning of a joke.
It was, and I asked him. I said, I walked in and I said, "Is this halal?" And he said, "Yes." And something in me was saying to me,
It's not.
"No, don't eat."
So much
And
you
I
get
didn't.
offended, They actually have a red face. You ask me, is this halal? And they're like, well, what do you think?
Yeah, so he said to me, yes, it is, but I wasn't comfortable, and despite the fact I was really hungry, I actually didn't buy food from there. And a few days later, I was again walking past, but I actually had a Kurdish friend with me at the time, who was a Muslim as well, and I asked him, I said, would you go in and ask? And he went, and they told him it wasn't.
Yes,
Strictly. So, sometimes your sixth sense will guide
See,
you.
you've got to make that effort. Yeah? So, like you're talking before as well, as in declining a job opportunity or any work that's coming in which could have an element of haram in it. I mean, the hadith described, hadith Qudsi, that Allah Rabbul Alameen says you have to make that effort, don't you? You've come a handspan towards Allah, He comes an entire arm length towards you. That means basically, and you walk towards Allah, His mercy comes running towards you. Doors will open, but it's coming down to that element of tawakkul, isn't it? Trust that Wallahu khairul raziqeen. He is the best of providers.
I just have to point out an effort here. I know a family in Halifax. They go out to this farm. They've got deers there, so they actually get the owner of the farm, the worker, whoever he is. He actually hunts them with a rifle, and the deer's lying, and they actually travel on the golf cart, wherever they have, to the animal and slaughter it themselves and take it home. So they're going the extra step to make sure what they're eating is absolutely, halal.
I mean, I know still people just outside of Oldham. They go to the farms, and they still slaughter at the animal themselves.
Yeah. So they've got the license to do it.
Yeah, they've got the license to do it.
Very good.
And they bring the animal here, give it to the local butcher. He then will butcher it and give you all the meat. And that's how they feel content. And if that's not done, they're not having anything else at all.
I'm not going to mention any names, but I know certain people, they in Manchester, they actually slaughter animals in the backyard. So they're taking up the grass bit, especially on the beach. No, they're not licensed. Let's just say, but it's
Yeah, so these are the precautions.
What would you say about that? That's actually a good question to bring up now.
Yeah.
Okay.
This person's gone to means that is under the law of the land, very questionable.
Yeah.
But for the sake of the law of his religion. What would you say about that now? I think we've got the perfect panel for that. One from the law side, one from the religious side.
I've got a follow-up question as well. Just in your presence.
I'll give you an example.
هذا فراق بيني وبينك.
This one here. So people always, some people will always say that you shouldn't follow the law of the land because we are not in a Muslim country. But Islam tells you that you should follow the law of the land.
Of course.
Right? It is paramount.
So long as you don't have to compromise.
So, yeah, absolutely. So, it doesn't go fundamentally against the principles of Islam.
Okay.
So one of the things that you do when you take your nationality in the UK is you give an oath to the Queen. Right? So the question is, those people who go to that extra length, why do they give the oath to the Queen when they try and achieve a nationality which they work for years?
What if we just born in, man?
Yeah, but you are still a principal under the monarchy as far as the law of the land is concerned.
You have a passport.
And you have the the law of the land dictates what you can and cannot do. And as Muslims, we are advised that you should stick to the law of the land. You should not go against the law of the land as long as it
requires us to compromise, not fundamentally, but on aspects of our deen. I'll give you a really pragmatic one, like the social distancing that we had to do for quite a while was really quite offensive to a lot of people, Muslims especially, because that fundamentally not fundamentally, but it goes against the command of the Prophet who's instructed us to close the gaps, etc. So some people would have prayed without closing the gaps. Was that taqwa there? Or would taqwa be, it's a very difficult question, I know.
It was questionable anyway.
Adhere to what's been said based on this principle of following.
Okay, so you go back to, so the way I look at it is you go back to your starting point. At the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when there was a disease in a place, the order was, don't leave that place and nobody else comes here into that place. So the disease in essence is cordoned off in an area, so it doesn't spread, so control the spread of that disease.
But people will counter that. People will counter that straight away. If you got Sayyidina Umar who's travelling towards a plagued area.
Yeah.
And he says, I'm fleeing from the qadr of Allah to the qadr of Allah, meaning whatever afflicts me is by the qadr of Allah. So how far do we take our religiosity? Do we go to war with what's legal with religiosity is what I'm trying to say?
Hold on, but let me go back to that before I come to that.
I think that example is an isolated example.
Okay.
Not to be taken for the norm.
I was just going to say, well, I'll come back to that because
people use it,
the personality of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh, not there is only one Sayyidina Umar. So the idea of that was to cordon off that plagued area or the diseased area. But in the day and age we live in, the way the transport is available, that within hours you can go from one side of the world to the other side of the world, and that's exactly what happened. And at that time when the lockdown happened, I was actually stuck in Pakistan, and I was trying to get a flight back. And whilst I was boarding the flight from Pakistan, they had tremendous amount of health checks before you were even allowed to get onto the plane. Whereas when we came off at Manchester Airport, there was no checks. Nobody even took a temperature. Nobody did anything. You just walked straight through. So, you look at first the principles of control and what effort was made to control it. And I think it was severely lacking at that stage. And that's not a political statement. I'm physically experienced it. So I can say that. Now, it resulted then in a chain reaction of things had gone so much out of control that certain steps had to be introduced to try and control the spread of the infection. And obviously, sacrifices had to be made either in prayer or in even work, and every part of life was severely impacted.
There was an additional dimension, though, that it was enforceable by law as well. So
Yeah.
there's penalties
So-
and fines included.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that resulted in the law being enacted, which was then enforceable by the police. And then obviously we hear now the Partygate scandal, which the Tory government is going through. But there were people who had get-togethers, and they were fined and they were arrested by the police. So the implementation was also there. The aspect of what you were saying in terms of standing a meter apart or 2 meters apart at the beginning, but I think from the management of masajid point of view, if you look at it from that
No, I
point
get
of
that
view,
point.
so what would the masajid? So you have the option of conforming to the law of the land, which is what you're being asked to do again, which is a responsibility upon you as Muslims to do. Or you ignore it and you say, actually, you know what, I am not going to do it. We are going to stand shoulder to shoulder. And imagine now that if you were doing that, or anybody was doing that, and now somebody reports it to the police, and you get the police coming into the house of Allah,
Which has happened.
which has happened.
Has
So, which road do you
that's-
take?
It does go back to that question, because in those situations, fatwas were given that you can social distance.
Yeah, shari uzr.
So now, but there are people who are saying, but my taqwa is stopping me, stopping me. Why? Because I've got so much yaqeen, for example. We know that if someone's afflicted with a disease, we make a certain dua, and we have yaqeen in it that the disease will never touch us. So how far can we take that religiosity that I'm saying?
So,
Or is religiosity conforming to the law?
but there are two sides to a coin. So, the person who says, I have such a strong taqwa and belief that nothing will touch me, alhamdulillah. What if you are a carrier and you pass it on to someone else whose taqwa is not
Is there
as
an
strong as
additional
yours?
factor here where if you decide not to follow the law of the land and follow your keen and push your understanding, then aren't you causing more, it's not harm, but it's going to be damage by fines and penalties, enforcement?
Absolutely. I think the idea is not, if something like that happens, you have to take the bigger view. I actually had a conversation with somebody. Someone actually came to me and said, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't have social distancing in Salah. This goes against the inherent principles of praying Salah and Hadith. And he sat and had a conversation, with me. And I said, okay, but can you indemnify personally all of the mosques and organizations up and down the country, legally, financially, and otherwise? If you can, then we'll have a chat. And he couldn't, because he can't. It's above and beyond what he does. So, to say that this is my personal, taqwa and my personal, belief, that's between you and your Lord. But what you shouldn't do is then enforce it on the whole of the community to follow, just because you believe personally that this is.
So safety is better, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Better to be
And
safe.
again,
Saving the life of a human, that overrules everything. Even the shoulder to shoulder and practically, that hukum of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If you then broke it down to the hadith itself, how strong the hadiths are, the hukum of this, what's the wujub within this amr in itself, from a fiqh point of view, that can be discussed as a separate subject as a whole. But what I believe over here, like you have examples, so the discussion is turning out to be Sharia law versus British law, isn't it?
well,
you could say.
it's a balance between the two,
Yeah.
I suppose.
So an example, again, you're the lawyer here. So when it comes to laws of inheritance, for example, it's a common question put forward, and people try to abuse the system by taking advantage of British law and not going by Sharia law. Because let's suppose if the wife in a situation is getting less from the Sharia law, she'll go straight to the courts and she'll want a big payout, wouldn't she?
But this is why, Hafsab, I think it's really important in the day and age we live and in the country we live. It is very, very important for everybody to have a will. The law of the land allows you to have a will, so the distribution of your assets can be in accordance with your religious beliefs. If somebody is is too lazy to make a will. You know, you never know when your life will end, but you know, if you're too lazy to make your will, you run that risk.
Am I right in saying there's a tax on inheritance?
Yes, there
So
is.
what about those people who would go through legal loopholes to avoid that tax? So, for
It's the
example,
same
putting
thing.
the assets into the business or something like that, and then letting inherit to the children like that. That sort of legal loophole is what I'm talking about.
So look, you know, the law allows you to do, you know, certain things as long as you stay within the limits. So the way I envisage is the law is like a frame. It's like it's a framework. Within that frame, you can go up, down, left, right, however you want, as long as you stay within that framework. And the law allows you to plan for. You can plan your estate. You can reduce your tax liability.
Let me make it more difficult. If there's a there's a legal loophole that could potentially be better for us religiously, are we okay to use it? Do you
As
encourage
long
that?
as yes. So if
Within the framework.
so when you say
So
there's
it's
a loophole,
meaning that you're not going to be held to it. But
no. So when you
people
say
question the ethics or whatever
Well,
you can.
your question is if there's a loophole, right? The loophole means that it is legally permissible. It is not against the law. As long as it is not against the law, you are within the boundaries of the legal system within the UK, and you are within the boundaries of Sharia.
Yeah, but what
As
if
long as you
it's-
don't transgress beyond the two,
Yeah.
you're fine.
Yeah, but what if it's not defined as unlawful? Does that mean it's lawful?
Yes. So, for example,
Postman.
it is clearly defined that on a road that you're traveling, the speed limit is 30. The moment you go beyond that, you're breaking the law. It's quite clear. Okay.
So let's say someone goes the legal limit because it's late for namaz.
I actually had someone who said to me, he said, whenever I try and rush for namaz or anything related to deen, I never ever get a speeding ticket. But the moment I do it for myself, I always get a speeding
That's basically me
ticket.
every
That's his
evening.
Taqwa working for him now, isn't it?
That's basically every evening rushing to Quba Masjid, isn't it then?
You're travelling off Manchester, you are.
Yeah, I've got to go all the way around.
So, you know, as long as the law doesn't specify, as long as you are within the boundaries, then it is
We just,
perfectly
as a message, got last few minutes. So, importance of getting a will.
Yes.
How important is that?
I think it's of utmost importance because the responsibility is on the individual, and even after you pass away, and
I mean,
you
it could
correct
be
me if I'm
it's
wrong.
a sudden death, so he's not actually prepared for it at all. He's not aware.
Well, your hisab kitab, your accounting of the grave continues until the warisin, the beneficiaries, have had their shares. And if that is the case, and everybody knows this, then it is absolutely paramount to have a will. And there is nothing stopping you updating your will every 6 months, every year, every 2 years, every 5 years. You know, you could. There are a number of ways in which it could be done without having to rewrite the whole thing
That's
again.
Islamically encouraged as well, isn't it? To constantly
Absolutely.
look at your wasiyah, look
So
at your wasiyah.
I think
Isn't Imam Ghazali used to carry it even under his pillow as well, like to remind him of maut, that you're going to go one day, you're going to leave everything behind.
See, you know, one of the difficulties that I see with people is that they don't speak about this to their families. They're reluctant to discuss this at home, and we shouldn't be. We should be able to speak to our siblings and our spouses and our parents and everybody quite openly, because you may want to make a nasiha that if something happens, I would like you to do this, this. So, you know, it's extremely important. And as I say, the law of the land allows you to have a will which is Sharia compliant. So if that facility is there, then it is up to us to make sure we take
Just
it.
a
We need
quick question
education
here.
in
Sorry,
it.
Tim.
If anything, we need education on both on our context in terms of the legal side and the religious side. Education.
I think that's an entire podcast on its own.
Just a quick question before
In fact, we should
finish
do
off.
that. You
He's
know.
got a
Yeah.
closing
Tomorrow?
question.
Absolutely, it should be done.
Closing question.
Yeah.
Because I've got a
Um,
few questions
so-
myself on inheritance. and stuff.
Practically coming from someone who has no clue on how to go about creating a will, what's the first step we could take, you know, to put things into perspective for everyone watching?
I think the podcast just
So
turned into
we'll-
legal
we'll-
surgery.
I think we're
I
up to date on this.
I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll do another podcast on this, and you know,
Okay.
we'll just focus
An entire
on,
evening on this.
on wills.
Wills.
Yeah.
On
So let's
wills
do
and-
that.
and
I wouldn't have known
inheritance.
about that.
Sorry.
Even I wouldn't have known about that.
I
No,
wanna
you know,
know.
let's do it. You know, I think I
The
was
message
I
will
was
go out to
I was
the
actually being asked, you know, something today about the differences between a marriage under Islamic law and a marriage under English law, and what effect that may or may not have. So we'll do another one on that if you.
I think we've just opened a new sessions of legal surgery.
Legal surgery?
Yes.
Let's do it. Jali, inshallah. Thank you guys. It's been 1 hour and we've got a rush for reasons. Okay. Assalamu alaikum.
But not over the speed.